Hello, composing gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about applications of sub bass, specifically how we can enhance a kick drum with sub bass. This is a very common technique. It's more of an old school technique because back in the days, memory was limited and processing power was limited. You only had so many compressors and equalizers, so you would use a sine wave to enhance your kick drum. And this makes a lot of sense, right? Because if we look at our kick drums here, we have a very sort of short burst of energy. This we call the transient. In samples, it's actually got a special name. It's called the chiff. And chiffs are really important. They are very specific to the instrument because they are generated by the instrument. And then there's this periodic part. Now, the periodic part is much easier to synthesize because it repeats. That's why it's called periodic. It's a repeating cycle. And we could, like, this looks like a sine wave. We could just figure out how to make a sine wave do this, and we're set to go. But this little beginning part, these are sort of like puzzles that are very, very hard to replicate if you consider all the little actions. So if I had like a violin and I bring down my bow and strike the string with my bow, that striking motion is extremely complex. It's going to produce a very specific set of harmonics based on what the violin's made out of, how much tension's on the string, how hard I strike it. There's a lot of stuff that goes into place. And we're really specific to chiffs, to the beginning parts of sounds. We use them big time to indicate what that thing is. So you've been trained on it your whole life. Every sound you've ever heard, you've been using the chiff. So it's really important. And I also have it as a reminder. There's like a book that comes with this in the description for free. And so I highly recommend you read it. I took my time writing it. And so if you see here, we've got a chiff at the beginning, and I've labeled it as such, the chiff. And here's the periodic repeating part. This is a really easy example. Things like flutes, like when the flute player blows into their instrument, that first burst of air is going to have a very specific sound. And depending on how they do it, they'll achieve very different aural results. So we want to be very aware of our chiffs. We don't want to mess our chiffs up. And so we look at this sine wave or this kick drum, and right now it sounds like if there's no processing on it, and if I play it, that's what we got, right? So if I were to toss an EQ and we were to observe the frequency spectrum, let's see here. So I noticed a couple of things. First, I have some frequencies down here I don't want. And you can hear them sort of mucking things up. Second, we see this pattern of red sort of shoot down. It starts like around here and shoots down. This is very common in kick drums. You will have some sort of a frequency that will become our fundamental frequency, and it has a pitch bend and it shoots down the drum. It shoots down the spectrum. And then we also notice we have these upper harmonics. We're not going to worry about these today. They are a long topic that honestly, it's easier to synthesize using other techniques. We're not even going to talk about that. Today we're talking about sine waves, okay? So we say, what if I can shave off some of this? And I'm going to use an order 8, steep 8. So that already sounds loads better without these two frequencies down here. But what if I wanted to augment this kick further? Maybe it doesn't quite work with my track the way it is or whatever. So I could remove some of it. And we get this. This is also much more common in recording when you have a kick you're trying to work with. Sometimes you have to add some stuff into your kick to really get it to sound like the kick you want. We also notice this kick gets tonal when we move it, when we move some frequencies. That happens for similar reasons to the missing fundamental video that we talked about, where we get an implication of tone and pitch. However, we are not going to talk about that sort of stuff right now because there are other kicks that will not behave like that at all because they're so short or they're made of a completely different spectrum. And also keep in mind that a kick drum, right, ideally, if it was an acoustic kick, you're hitting a two-dimensional membrane. And that produces a really complicated result. So we're just going to look at this just basic thing, but there's a lot of other additional layers that come in here. So let's say we're gonna get rid of some of this and we're gonna add in a kick. Now, normally when we add in a sine wave, it'll be in the range of 50 hertz to about 30 hertz. I find myself going to 32 an awful lot, but we're gonna use Synth1 because we're mastering Synth1, right? And on Synth1, there's no way to specifically say, hey, play this exact frequency. So we're gonna have to use our ears. So the first step is, let me make sure I'm on my preset sound because I messed with this a bit. So here we go. That's our sound. So we need this sound, this sine wave. We want it to come in and just help out the low end of this kick. And right now, we notice that this, if we play a note, it's just going to keep ringing. We don't want that. So we're going to change the amplifier, also known as the amplitude envelope of our sound. And we'll talk about this more later. But essentially, because the chiff is so important, we want to avoid the chiff. So we're going to set our attack. This is how fast our sound gets loud. We're going to set that around like 40, 42. Use your ear. And our goal here is to just miss the chiff. We don't want to mess up the chiff, but we want it to come in to help out with the periodic part of the waveform. So maybe it's a little quick, maybe 47. That works out for me. It made a little less, 44, whatever. And then our sustain, when we hit a note, it will decay a little bit and then it will sustain at that level. We don't want to sustain. We want our sound to turn right off. So we're going to turn our sustain all the way down. And we get that. And this, the length of this, boom, the length of the amount of time it takes to turn off is determined by the decay and also the release. But we're going to be focusing on the decay. If I make it long, you see it takes forever. If I make it short, we can get in there. We want enough for the girth, the main body of our periodic waveform. We need it to be long enough for our ear to sense that, oh, there's a frequency down there, right? So, okay, we've got that. Now we need to find a frequency that works out here. Now to do this, I'm going to add an EQ here so we can observe where in the frequency spectrum we are. This is 63 hertz. Let's move it down to like the 38 hertz range and see if we can't get something in that range. So we're right there. Every kick's going to be a little different. Let's look at our other kick. You can do this by ear, but let's help our ear out a little bit by observing some stuff. So right about here is where exactly. So we're at like 48 hertz. So this might be a little higher of a kick. So let's see if we can't stick this up around 48. So where are we at right now? Right around there or there, probably there. And let's hear how it sounds by layering these two things together. Let's go to kick. Now our note's a little long. Okay, so we can hear it. Let's bring it down one. That seems to work pretty well. We're going to stick with the G. So we listen to this and we say, okay. And now this doesn't always work, by the way. You can get very different results. So we have it, and that's pretty much the secret after that. Now you can come through here and try and tighten it up with your decay. Something like that. And our kick is sort of this, like, it's got these crackles in it and stuff. So we might consider maybe giving it some snap and reducing some of this, like, crackly stuff in the middle. So if we turn this off, that's what we had before versus that, which is a lot tighter and cleaner. Now I might be going, that sounds less loud though and stuff. That's fine. We're going to mix it later. So we're shooting for tonal goals. We're not shooting to make this thing loud. We can always turn the volume up later. We can use compression. So if I were to bust these two into our green compression bus or whatever, we're going to, let's just like toss on a compressor. Now, if we toss on something like Maximus, we get a lot of control, but we'll also get a phase shift. Like, listen, if I turn it off, that's totally different than. For this reason, I love Maximus, and sometimes I hate Maximus. So it's doing a phase shift. So some of the frequencies have summed together differently, and so it sounds different. And in this case, I think it's a good sound. Now we have that mid-range stuff, so we may just have to find another kick. But it's already pretty nice. We got this nice high-end snap, but it's pretty loud. Well, it's a nice mid-range snap, not high-end snap. But and then to extend, if we want our kick to sound like big and bulgy, which is pretty common, I do not like affecting the beginning part of our envelope, but I'll bring up the latter part. And I have a whole series on Maximus if you're interested. But it just increases essentially the sustain on our kick. So there's one kick drum example. we could go to another. And so you may consider just trying this out on a track. In this case, it wasn't like incredible, like it's a much cleaner result than the other one. So this would be easier to work with. But as far as tone in a song, it'd have to fit a particular vibe. This isn't a tone I'd pick by default. Let's go ahead and listen to our other kick. So we have another, by the way, these are included in the packs that come with FL. So I'll have this FOP for downloading in the description. So here we have another kick. So we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to, let's just copy and paste the same note. And let's make our attack pretty fast. We settled on like 47 or something. And let's give those a listen. Let's do this on a separate pattern though. Bring our sustain down. Okay, so there we go. Let's do it again. So here we have our kick. Let's layer it in. This one we don't need. I'm not going to talk about that one. So this frequency needs to be slightly different. Sounds like F sharp would help it more than. Let's try up. No. I think that one resonates the best. And then let's try a faster attack. What the heck? We could also try, well, let's do a similar deal here. So let's go right here and we'll make this purple process. It's the purple process. Let's add an EQ. Let's do a little bit of post on this one. So on this kick, let's see if reducing some pieces of it will let our sine wave do its job a little bit better. So let's figure out where is our sine wave exactly. So we've added a frequency at about 50 hertz. Okay. Let's get rid of some of this. There's like this crunch sound in this kick I'm not the biggest fan of. That does a lot of good for our kick. Holy crap. And then I also want to include a cut down here. So here, adjusting this cut has two effects. So there's a phase shift that is introduced by this cut. And so by just changing the amplitude, you affect the phase shift a little bit as well. And that can have a big impact on our sound, as we've seen in previous videos. And we'll also see for a huge impact in one of the exercise videos. So what I mean is, if I were to open up the ozone EQ, they show you the phase plot of the EQ. And so we're actually affecting the phase going on here. So if you have ozone, great. If you don't worry. But they could show you a couple other things. So if we go into settings and we go to equalizer and we can go to show extra curves. And so here we see we have a phase delay, a phase response, and a group delay. And if I move this up or down, all of these things are changing. There's a lot of extra stuff going on. So just because you found the frequency, you could be affecting the sound in other ways. And usually it doesn't matter if you're in the upper end, like a little bit of phasing and stuff, you're not really going to notice that much. But if you're dealing with something like a kick whose fundamental is super duper important, or if you're messing with a sound like that, a lot is happening. And every plugin's doing this. They just don't show you all of it all the time. They just sort of, use your ears. That's what they say. So a lot more is going on here. So when I move this around, I found a relationship that reduces some of this low end mud, but also maybe sums in a way that actually, even though it looks like a cut, boosts this up a little bit. So, use your ears. Anyways, that's the reasoning behind it. And so if we did before, it's quite a bit muddier. It would definitely fight with more stuff in the low end. It sounds boomier. If we do it after, that's much better. Now we can talk about compression and other things, but then it's going to turn into like a whole separate tutorial. And so now we could come over here to our sine wave and maybe mess with this. Let's try a G again. Nah. You might like the F. I quite like the F. I feel like the E is too low. So it's between the F and the F sharp. I'm going to stick with the F sharp. So anyways, that's pretty cool thing we can do. So if we turn this off and turn our EQ off, that was our original sound. You hear that? Like this, like there's like something sort of sounds like, I don't even know, sounds like distortion. And then if I turn on our sine kick, we get that, which smooths out the distortion quite a bit too. But if I turn on my EQ, it just becomes so much more punchy and clean. And then after this, we could send it through, do some compression, bring it up, and make it a big part of our track if that's what we're going for. Have it in the background, and it will fight a lot of our elements a lot less. So using a sine wave to do this is a very common technique that hopefully you find very useful. Let me make sure. I just want to make sure I didn't skip anything important. Kicks. Now, I didn't talk a lot about like kicks, but I've looked at a freaking crud ton of kicks. You don't even want to know how many kicks I've seen. If you've ever done recording, you probably looked at a ton of kicks too. And it's kind of crazy because if you're recording, right, if you're making EDM, you have one kick. You do it once and then you're good for the rest of it because you're using the same kick. I tend to use 2 or 3 kicks, but if you're recording, that one kick is actually like a different kick every single time because it's going to hit slightly differently every time. So when you process, it's a lot more of a project. There's a lot more to consider here than just processing one kick. So that's a huge difference there. But the same principles apply. Typical hip hop kicks often have way crazier chiffs. They're often a lot more unique. EDM kicks tend to be much more sinusoidal. So these sort of techniques work very well. And in some cases, they're completely synthesized. So it just depends on what kind of sound you're going for. Let's see here. Waveform. And then I show you. So we can use it to clean up the low end, make it a lot cleaner. Also add punch, girth, or we could just use it and just layer it in there because we think it sounds neat. Once you find a frequency that you like, this is something I didn't do. You can adjust the pitch a little bit, maybe find a really sweet spot. So I said, oh, that FF sharp sounded pretty good. So we could try this. This essentially is right now playing F sharp. So if I make this 1 all the way down, it's playing an F now. So if I were to mix these together, maybe I could find something in the middle that has a phase relationship I really like. Maybe go down. See, like there. That's pretty nice. That one's going in the opposite direction. I don't like that as much. Somewhere around there, perhaps. So, you get really specific. Like, so there you go. There's that sort of thing to consider. Set your envelope, all that stuff. We can also get pretty big radical changes in sound with our kick drum if we alter the fundamental of our kick drum, because that's what we're messing with essentially here. And so if we want to mess with the chiff, we could see maybe we could cause a phase relationship with our chiff that will cause a more dramatic impact. So for example, if I come in here and if I make my attack really fast, 0, so now we're going to be affecting the chiff, we get this. And now Synth1 has rolling phase. So the phase restarts in a different position. If we want it to stay in the same, if you push the sync knob, even though it's an oscillator 2, you do get a result. Listen to this. It's kind of an interesting deal. Now, if we introduce the phase, now check this out. So right now, we've got this. But if we change the phase, we don't get that same click. It's like reduced. It's a little muffled. So here's the phase at 0. Here it is at 0. And if I move it around while it's playing, you can hear it affect the fundamental. With the phase at 0, the biggest, you could definitely hear a result. And now, because it's a little confusing because it's like linked to oscillator 2, but it's totally affecting oscillator 1 and this whole deal. So it is affecting both of them. Now, if I hit sync on oscillator 2, which is supposed to sync 1 and 2, I believe it also causes a sync relationship to occur in general, so that both waveforms start at the same spot. Because in order to sync it to 1, it's gotta control 1 as well. So it's not that clear in the manual. But if you listen to the oral results, check it out. So I'll put it right here without sync. Now let's introduce sync. Without sync, with sync, without, So it's just a weird deal. You can mess with this. If you decode the exact things that are going on here, let me know. But these are the results you can get out of it. So I thought it was worth mentioning. It is something you can affect, and plugins will often do a better job at affecting the phase more consistently anyways. But you do have internal capabilities with Synth1 to alter some of these relationships. I also pull out Maximus. Maximus, we already looked at it a little bit, but Maximus has similar issues because, again, it does that whole phase shift thing that goes on. And Maximus has a quite severe one. So, sometimes great, sometimes it's not. You could try linear phase filters. And I believe I linked to a tutorial where I talk about it. Yeah. So I talk about linear phase filters and infinite impulse and finite impulse response filters also here from an audio perspective. So we just forget all the details of all the math because there's like filter design and you could study a lot of that. But honestly, if you're going to make music, you don't need to really know all that. Just be aware of this here. And that's pretty much it. So there you go. That is what you do when you want to supplement a kick drum or any percussive sound really with a sine wave or any other waveform. Just take all these things into account. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.